Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of July 28th. Just by way of introduction, we are the Planning Commission for the Town of Los Gatos. We're a group of volunteers who are appointed by the Town Council to have public hearings and make land use decisions based on existing town policies and ordinances. We do not make policy, rather we interpret cases based on existing policy. If you're new here, we would like for you to fill out a speaker card if you wish to speak on any item on tonight's agenda. They should be in the seats either in front or behind you. And if you could pass them to staff here on my right. You'll have two opportunities to speak. If you wish to speak on a particular item, you can speak then. Or we also have verbal communications, which we hear speakers on any topic that is not on tonight's agenda. Yeah. So, and one little housekeeping note, if you do have a cell phone, we'd ask that you'd silence it during the meeting. Thank you. And can we get a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Erickson.
Here.
Commissioner Talsfor. Here. Commissioner Jensen.
Here.
And Chair Bourgeois.
Here.
And Commissioner Sayoc and Commissioner Michichi both have excused absences. So we do have a quorum.
We do have a quorum. And if everyone would stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The first item on tonight's agenda, we have a set of minutes from July 14th meeting. If we have any comments, changes, or a motion to approve. Commissioner Talsfor.
Although I wasn't here the last previous meeting, I did review the minutes, so I feel like I could vote.
Great, thank you.
That's the same for me. I understand from council's advice that we are not here. If we review the minutes and find them satisfactory, we can vote, so I can vote.
Great, thank you. So do we have a motion? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'll move the adoption.
And do we have a second? Commissioner Talsfor.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion to approve the minutes of July 14th. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Written communications is the next. I do not see any desk items.
We have not received any written communications.
Okay, great. And we have one requested continuance. This is item number 2, which is 15.5 North Santa Cruz Avenue, conditional use permit U-10-011. This is requesting approval to increase the hours of operation, the number of seats, and allow live entertainment at a bar and restaurant on property zone C2 LHP. And they are requesting it be continued to the meeting of August 15th. Is that correct?
Actually, it's August 25th.
I'm sorry, August 25th. Yes. Okay, so do we have a motion? Commissioner Jensen.
I'll move that we continue item 2 as summarized by the chair, U-10-011, to our meeting of August 25th.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner Erickson. Seeing no other comments, all those in favor of continuing the item, say aye.
Aye.
Unopposed? None. Again, passes unanimously. Item number 2, if you're here for that item, has been continued to August 25th. And is there any re-noticing?
No, there wouldn't be since we did continue it.
Okay, great. That brings us to subcommittee reports. Have there been any subcommittee reports since our last Planning Commission meeting? Commissioner Erickson.
We had a Historic Preservation Committee meeting this afternoon, considered and recommended to the Director of Community Development the approval of an addition to a home on Pennsylvania, and then also recommended to the Director of Community Development our support for the plan. We reviewed the plans for the Fiesta Way house, which is being relocated to University, and recommended to Ms. Rooney that those go forward, and also reviewed a couple of other things as informational items that not to take formal action on them.
Thank you, Commissioner Erickson. Any other subcommittees? Nope, that's it. Okay, so this brings us to the part of our agenda called verbal communications. I don't have any cards. If anyone in the audience wishes to speak on an item not on tonight's agenda, now would be the time. And seeing no one, I'm going to close verbal communications. We have nothing on our consent calendar and no continued public hearings. So that brings us to item number 1, our first new public hearing. This is 17505 Hicks Road. It's an architecture and site application and a negative declaration, and they're requesting approval to construct a new single-family residence on property zone HR 20. Can we get a staff report?
Yes, and Senior Planner Suzanne Davis will present that tonight.
Good evening. This property is located on the west side of Wagner Road. It's just west of Hicks and south of Arnorich Road, and Arnorich actually runs along one of the property edges. The site was annexed into the town in April of 2010 as part of a larger annexation that took in 5 properties in addition to this one. The site's 11.05 acres, is currently undeveloped. Much of it's wooded, primarily with oak trees. There's a gently sloping meadow area, and that's where the development is proposed. And we do have a seasonal tributary that crosses the northeast corner of the site. No work is proposed in that area at this point. We may have one water line that will need to cross that, and you'll see there is a number of mitigation measures in the environmental report, some of them pertaining to that aspect of the project if it occurs. So you're considering an architecture and site application for construction of a new 2-story residence with an attached garage and cellar, and there's also a barn and corral and a pool and outdoor area proposed. 3 small trees are proposed for removal. All of those are in poor condition. And the arborist, in addition, recommended that a large oak that's out in the right-of-way be removed. At this time, the applicant does not intend to take it out. It is not anywhere near the development area, and no work will be done in that vicinity. So it may come out in the future, but at this point, it isn't coming out as part of the project. About 10% of the site will be developed under the proposal. The development is all within the LRDA, and the impervious surface will cover about 3% of the site. The house and FAR are within the range for other homes in that area. The project will exceed our Greenpoint certification. The requirement is to have 50 points. The project actually has 152 with a preliminary checklist. The applicant has shared their plans with their neighbors, and you have 2 letters of support attached to the staff report. There is one exception being requested to the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines, and that is to some cut and fill depths. And I did want to clarify, because I had a question from a commissioner, there is not an exception to the cut for the driveway. There is some fill for the driveway that is going to be over 3 feet, and it's an area up around the turnaround. There's a lot of balancing being done on this project. There's an extensive septic system that's required, and a lot of that front portion of the property along the road is going to be reserved for the septic system, the installed leach lines, and also the reserve lines. The grading is being done. Overall, there's a number of different reasons, but we're trying to lower the house into the site to lower its profile, make sure that the connection and transition between the driveway, the house, the rear yard, and the barn area all work together, and to provide an extensive drainage system. I mean, one of the goals on this site is to not have post-runoff increase over what is existing today. So there's the drainage system that's being put in will ensure that that doesn't occur, and we will meet all the C3 requirements for stormwater runoff through our NPDES permit. We're also putting in a fire turnaround and this septic system that I also already mentioned. A number of technical reviews were done as part of the project, including arborist, architectural, geotechnical, and environmental review. And as part of the environmental, we did a biologic and cultural evaluations on the site. In order to approve the application, there's a number of steps you need to take, including approving the mitigated negative declaration, adopting a mitigation monitoring plan. All of the mitigation measures have been included as conditions of approval. You do need to make an exception to the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines for grading. Find that the project is otherwise consistent with the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines, that it's consistent with the Hillside Specific Plan, and that the considerations for review of architecture and site applications have been made. Staff has prepared findings. They're attached to your staff report. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Do we have any questions of staff at this time? I see no questions, so we're going to move along and ask the applicant to come up and give their presentation. I don't have a card for the applicant. If you could, at some point, fill that out and pass it down. Since I don't have a card, if you could just introduce yourself, give your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Montgomery Kirsten, 13917 Albar Court in Saratoga, where we're living now. Honorable Chairman and Commissioners, thanks for having a few moments to talk about our plans, but I think Suzanne did a wonderful job of sort of overviewing the project, so I'll just try and give you a little bit of context about what our goals are. My wife has brought our twin boys, and she has a third boy that's on the way, and that really is a critical reason why we chose Los Gatos and the neighborhood. We've been looking for 4 years for the right place. We both grew up in the Midwest where we both had rural environments, and we saw all the values that can come to you from that. And I sure wanted to find the right place to have these kids grow up and stay active with them myself. So we were able to find this beautiful 11-acre spot that has 3.5 acres of meadow out front and a wonderful hillside to play in. And I'm not above doing that myself up there. It's got some sweet meadows up there as well. And we wanted to design something that was very complementary with the neighborhood and could also work for the recreation outdoors with the family, have a sport court in the house to be able to have an indoors in the winter activity, those sorts of things. So we got the dream of having Los Gatos, the town with all of its great services and the education. Of course, we know exactly where these boys are going to school down the street. And the neighborhood, we've met all the neighbors, they're wonderful people. The houses are often, because it was all in the county before it was annexed around us, often the houses around us are larger, taller, and are on smaller pieces of land. And she's already named the numbers that are very respectful. It gives us really about 90% of the lots open space, which is a good way to think of it. So that's why we chose this spot, and we hired a team of seasoned veterans that worked with the town here for many years. Gary Colsat and his architectural firm, and David Fox, a landscaping architect that has worked with the town for a very long time. And we went to work to make sure we could conform with all the requirements and still have the site work for us. It was 12 months ago. We started last July. We now have successfully conformed, we think, with all the things we need to. We're laymen, but we seem to have the support of every single one of the town's consultants and the town's architect, and we worked hard to get that. We reduced the grading through several meetings. We went down very considerably on that to make sure we could try and have things balanced and fit in the neighborhood. So it's also interesting with the town's requirements for Hillside, they actually are much tougher than the counties in that same neighborhood. So you can see that the land, we're going to fit into the neighborhood very nicely because we have tougher things to fit with. I want to thank very sincerely Suzanne, who we just would not have been able to get this done without her really able guidance. She was very clear on what had to be done and how we should work with people, and it really made all the difference in getting us to this point. And because you were willing to devote your evening to this extra meeting, if things go well tonight, we have a chance to get the foundation in the ground before the rains and get closer to Los Gatos a little faster. So thank you for letting me speak. And I'll fill out a card.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant? If you could stay up there for a second.
Of course.
Anyone have any questions? I have one question, and it's probably for your architect. I would like to maybe if you could talk us through where the exceptions to the grading cut and fill depths, where it exceeds the hillside standards and guidelines, and just the process you went through of trying to balance things on site so we can understand why those cut and fill depths need to be what they are.
My name is David Fox. I'm the landscape architect on the project. Mainly, John, it is in where the driveway is. In order to provide a fire truck turnaround there, you can only have a 5% cross slope. So because that's all we could have, we needed to raise that area somewhat. There was a secondary reason for raising that area also, and that was we wanted to keep more dirt on site if we could, so that we'd have less off-haul onto the roads. And we did that in a couple of ways. With the septic system, you're only allowed to have a foot of depth over the septic system, so we couldn't add more dirt there, but we did add some. That kept some on the lot. We were able to raise the driveway somewhat, not only to meet the cross-slope requirement, but also to use more dirt there so that we had less off-haul. And in general, that's what we tried to do on the site. With the retaining walls in back, they all meet the cut depths. The walls also, I think it should be noted, go from 0 at both ends up to the maximum height, which is about 5 feet, and then back down to 0 again on the other side. So what we were trying to do was to blend the pad into the site as much as possible. We have a 10% slope there, and by taking the walls in the configuration that we did in the curving configuration, we were able to do that. So where you're looking at greater depths is really in the front there, and that was to both hide dirt and to meet the cross slope requirements.
Great.
It's only about a foot.
A foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we exceed. We exceed only
right.
by about a foot. So it's really very little.
Right. Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate that. Do we have any other questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, seeing none, we're going to open this up to the public for comments. I do have one speaker card. It's Michael, sorry, I'm going to, Kokinos. So you have 3 minutes if you wish to speak.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Kokinos, and I'm sure you've gone out to see the story poles of the project. And if you have, if you turn directly around, I've got the French house with the stone covering on the outside on the other side of the creek. So just to put it in context where we are. I've lived in the area for 16 years now, and we love being where we are, and we've been very fortunate because of the work that's been done in the area to make sure that it has maintained a certain consistent character. And before I get started, I want to say I have no objections to the Kirstens building a house. We're excited about having neighbors, so that's a good thing. I do have a couple questions, however, that I would like to have some additional focus on, hopefully get some answers tonight. And it falls into 4 separate areas. The first one is the question of clearance for the septic lines. I know on the property, on the plans, it shows that one well will be decommissioned. However, I know there's a couple other wells that are on the site. And when we built our house on the other side of the creek, one of the things that the county septic folks told us that you need to have that 100-foot setback from any well or any live water to make sure we don't have any contamination. So I want to make sure that we've got the 100-foot setback. So that's the first question. And if any wells, it looks like one of the wells is going to be decommissioned, so I want to make sure that if it's decommissioned, just want to understand what that looks like. But again, it's clearance from the septic lines. The next question is, I know as a neighborhood group, we worked with the town for a lot of months and actually years on the Greenbrier project as it related to lighting. And I know one of the hillside requirements that was adopted for Greenbrier was that all the lighting was underneath eaves to prevent the upglow. And to their credit, they really did a good job. And now living out there looking in that direction, we don't have that aura that surfaces over a lot of the other projects we look out towards Guadalupe. So septic and then lighting, those are the concerns that those are all under the eaves. The third question is the question of perimeter fencing for wildlife corridors. We've had a fortunate opportunity to see the deers, and it's sort of a mixed blessing. It's good to see the wildlife, but at the same time to eat all of our roses. So we have to just make sure that we maintain some sort of wildlife corridors through the area. So just, again, as we look at the plans and refine them, I want to make sure that issue is addressed. And then across the creek, when water was brought to Arnerich Road a couple years ago, there were, I think, 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 water lines put across the creek. And as they were put across the creek, they did do a really good job. The county actually came out and red tagged the job, and the previous owner, Mr. Puett, just threw a bunch of cement down in the creek. So I have some sensitivity about, preservation of the corridor and the riparian area. And then, other than that, it sounds like they've done a really good job. They've worked really hard. Looks like there's a lot of good thought and a lot of effort that's gone into the project. Again, for us, it's really about the contamination of the water table, the lighting to make sure that it's underneath the eaves, and then the wildlife corridors. And then I just have the curiosity to question, how much dirt is actually going to be off-hauled from the project? And other than that, like I said, we're excited about having neighbors. We look forward to having him. Monty seems like a real nice guy. And I just want to make sure that, we're all taking care of them there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Let's see. Does the commission have any questions for Mr. Kokinos? No, seeing none. Thank you. No questions. So I have no other speaker cards, and seeing no one else here to speak, the applicant can come back up, and you have 3 minutes to rebut, answer questions, make any closing statements you wish to make.
Good evening. I'm Gary Colsack, the architect. I've given you a card. I'd like to just address Mike's questions, starting with the septic tank. or the septic field. It's been approved by the Department of Environmental Health in the county, and they are very well aware of our wells. And it is a 100-foot radius from any active well, and we have maintained the 100-foot radius. So there's no reason for any concern on that. He asked about exterior lighting. There's a condition number 10 effectively addresses that. It will be very similar to all the other projects in Los Gatos, the hillsides. And I can read it to you, or I can show you that. Yeah, okay. The fencing, the property is fenced existing all the way around, and we're just maintaining that fence the way it is. And then, except for the front, we're redoing that with an open wrought iron style, so we can better see this lovely house. And then we weren't aware of some shoddy work, evidently, about the water lines coming across. There's 4 or 6 meters, something like that, on Arnerich, and actually bring San Jose water to not only our property, but some of the neighbors' properties up Wagner. And they had to go underneath this swale, and it was capped off with concrete. We are actually proposing to add one more water line, which is a fire line, and we'll do that with all necessary permits and inspections, and I can guarantee you we'll do that in the correct manner. So, if anybody respects the site, it's Mr. Kirsten. So I'm very happy to be working with him. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you. I appreciate you addressing the neighbors' questions directly. Is there any, Commissioner O'Donnell?
This isn't my question, but I believe the neighbor did ask how many yards or cubic feet or whatever it is of dirt will be off-hauled.
Oh, it is, I'm not sure, maybe
About 5,000.
if I may comment about that, the interesting thing is we're very, very close to Hicks Road, which is in the city of San Jose. And so we're traveling very, very briefly on Los Gatos streets. And we have the landfill right around the corner. So it's extremely convenient.
And I have a follow-up question on the fencing. Maybe I missed it. Is there a fencing detail in the plans, or is it in plan view where the new fencing is going to go? I'm just concerned about his comment. It's a concern of mine as well about the wildlife movement. And there's a ton of deer out there when I went to visit, and how tall is the fence? And if I could get some of those details, that'd be great.
You want to talk about the fence? Sure.
If you look right behind you, John, on the plan that's right next to number 1, the site plan, the very end plan, you can see that there's a double gate structure right there in front. I'll come point it out.
Take the mic, yeah.
Yeah, right there where Gary is pointing right there, right at the beginning of the driveway in there. The property is actually fenced all the way around as it presently sits. So there's a new piece of fence being brought in here with the gates in it, and that's the only piece of fence that we're changing at present. It is completely fenced right now. There are gates right here that so there's nobody unless the deer jump over the fence, which they do. Then they're not crossing through the property as it presently sits.
When I visited the site, there was a fence right by the driveway, but you could walk just right around it. It didn't seem to be fenced along that frontage road.
Taken down.
Must have been taken down.
Yeah, that part of the fence was removed because.
Okay.
That is correct. It was fenced completely.
Okay, that's why I was confused, because you're talking about it being fenced all the way around. It's like, well, I just walked straight onto the property.
Yeah, when the Puettes owned it, it was fenced completely around the property.
And it would be you're replacing with a similar chain link fence?
Yeah, except at the very front where we have the gates. Yeah. And Commissioner O'Donnell, on the grading issue, just to reactivate that,
Hey, if we could, in the audience, excuse me, if we could keep the communication down, thank you.
We did work with the staff quite extensively on the grading, and we were able to reduce all of the grading quantities by 20%. So the application that you see now has a pretty big reduction from the initial application that we made to the town, and we worked with Suzanne and John Gaylord on that.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions of the applicant at this time? Commissioner Talasfora.
If you could, somebody, architect probably, if you could address, thank you for coming down here, the whole team. But can you address the height for me? It's 24, 10 inches, is that correct?
That's correct.
What I wanted to know is that after it's lowered into the ground? Is that what you were doing with that? Will it be lower than 24 when we're looking at it? Tell me what
Could I clarify? I think she's asking, is it 2410 above existing grade?
Right, thank you.
Or is it 2410 from finished grade?
It's from finished grade. That's the way the town measures it.
Okay.
So it's from finished grade.
Thank you, Chairman.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just want to follow up on your question about wildlife corridors. If I understand the position of the applicant at the moment is there really isn't a wildlife corridor except to the extent that deer can jump over fences.
And turkeys fly over.
Now, wait a minute.
Wait, yeah.
I would love to listen to you that way, but this is all recorded. So I guess while we're talking to you, it's the best time to explore this, so that's what I'm doing. We have been sensitive to wildlife corridors, and I think what I'm hearing is, well, there isn't one now, we don't propose that there be one, and that should end the question. Is that your position?
That is our position.
Okay, thank you.
And again, there was no consideration given to, something like a split rail fence to allow wildlife movement?
If I could address that question, please, being the applicant. The property, as all of our neighbors are, has been fenced in its perimeter since we bought it, and it's existed that way for some time, with a classic chain link fence that's about 5.5 feet high. The day I got there, turkeys flew over my shoulders over that fence, and the day I went to look at it, I had to hop the fence to look at the land. So it's been that way for a good deal of time. It's the case with the rest of the neighborhood. I also have 3 dogs that I do not want to have eaten by coyotes, right? And I can tell you, there's coyotes that go right by me in Saratoga right now, whether it's fenced or not, they're out there. We don't propose on changing anything. I'm super respectful of wildlife. I'm a donor to open space and a big believer in it. We're right across from the Almaden silver mines where there's a huge abundance of wildlife. It's not like we're doing some kind of fencing and preventing a wildlife corridor. There never one was there, and I don't believe opening our fences up would create a wildlife corridor because our neighbors are also fenced. Right across the street, you have wonderful movement of all those deer and also along the side, along the creek. So I think that addresses it from
All
that
right.
perspective.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no other comments, I'm going to close the public input portion of the public hearing, and I'm going to turn it over to the commission for questions of staff, discussion, comments, or a motion. So we have a couple things we need to do. We have an architecture and site application, and we also have a SEQA document. We have a negative declaration that we need to meet. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'm not going to make a motion at this point, but staff, I think, has given a strong recommendation of approval. My review of the plans, I have not found anything that I personally would object to. I did ask the question about the wildlife corridor so I could get an answer on it. I probably would say the same thing as the applicant is saying. I do have a lot of deer in my property. So I just throw that out because if any of my fellow commissioners have questions or objections, I'd like to hear them before I would make a motion.
Maybe we can just go down the line. Commissioner Erickson, if you want to.
I have no concerns with the applicant.
Okay. Commissioner Talasfora, is there anything?
My questions were answered.
Okay. Commissioner Jensen?
Can I make a motion?
Please.
3 commissioners have indicated that they don't have a problem with the project. I don't think we've heard any significant issues, and I hope that Mr. Kinkako's question, have been answered adequately. He's not jumping up, so. What we need to do are several things, as Commissioner Chair Bourgeois indicated. The first is to make mitigated negative declaration. We have environmental report and mitigated declaration report with suggested mitigation measures that are contained in that report, and I would be prepared based on those exhibits and the testimony we've had tonight to make the mitigated declaration and adopt the mitigation monitoring program, which is contained in Exhibit 3 of our packet, and those contain the various measures that are required to mitigate potential impacts on the property. I haven't heard any objections to any of those, so I would move that we adopt that. I would move that we approve the exception to the hillside design standards and guidelines on the cut and fill. And I'm sure you've been made aware by Ms. Davis that the Planning Commission is extraordinarily sensitive to cut and fill in the hillside. You are developing in the least restrictive area, so that's a plus. In looking at your property, you seem to have located on a very flat portion and away from the trees and away from where you're just going to cut directly into the hillside, so I commend you for that. And we are very loath to make any exceptions to the cut and grade. However, the way you've explained it, for fire safety, for the leach field, and I'm assuming also for your green issues with your house and how that's your septic system is going to be taken care of, and the transitional stream and the riparian habitat, and your interest in keeping the offload from the property at a minimum, which I would commend. And you're very fortunate to be located right next to the dump up the hill from you, so congratulations on that. So I think that there's been enough testimony that's been presented that we actually could make the finding that the way you've decided to go about this project is actually a reason for us to make an exception, and as has been pointed out, the exception is minimal, only a foot, as you've explained it in this instance. So I would be prepared to make that portion of the motion as well. And other than that exception, I could make the finding as contained, based on the evidence contained in our staff report, that is otherwise consistent with our hillside specific plan. And finally, I find that, the project is consistent with the considerations of approval for architecture and site applications, which are contained in Exhibit 4. And I would make this motion subject to it being conditioned on all of those items listed in the conditions contained in the staff report, in particular the lighting conditions that were mentioned by the other speaker, and all other considerations. I'll just address the wildlife corridor because it has been brought up here tonight. That is a concern, but I think it is correct in riding my buck up that road quite a lot. There's a lot of wildlife on there, and I'm very familiar with those roads, and the properties generally are fenced. However, you certainly see a lot of wildlife, so I'm not particularly concerned with your plan for the fencing. So I think that is the extent of my motion, which would be to approve architecture and site application S09-064 and the native declaration -10-003.
Thank you, Commissioner Jensen. So we basically have a motion to approve architecture and site and the negative declaration. Do I have a second? Commissioner Erickson.
I'll enthusiastically second the motion made by my fellow commissioner.
Okay, and since I'm the only one that really hasn't spoken on this, I would concur that I think you've done a great job. You've got a beautiful site, and we appreciate the efforts made to do it the right way. So it's greatly appreciated. So that being said, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? 0. Passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Are there
Thank you very much.
appeal rights?
Yes, there are appeal rights, and anyone who's has a concern with the project can appeal that to the City Council within 10 days.
Great, thank you. So that is our only public hearing for tonight, and we still have, if you guys could take the conversation outside, we still have a meeting to continue. Thank you. We have no continued other business, and that brings us to new other business. Do we have a report from the Director of Community Development?
Just a quick item. I just want to let you know that you have a very busy meeting on the 11th of August. And as you remember, maybe we can go close those. As you remember, the reason why we added this meeting was because we had so many items that were going in July. Most of those ended up getting continued, and now we have a really busy August. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. We do have two we have two large projects. We have the Ross Creek subdivision will be on the August 11th agenda. We will also have the plan development application amendment for the Thrash House project. And then lastly, we have a smaller, not as lengthy probably and not as controversial, conditional use permit for a new restaurant, Panera Bakery, that's being proposed at the building that's never been occupied at 15200 Los Gatos Boulevard. Yay. So we are starting at 7 at a regular time, but it will be a long meeting, I have no doubt. So just be prepared for that.
Do we know the order of those? I know there are several of us that have to recuse ourselves from the from one of the items, the Thrash House.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we can position.
I think we can position that because we are proposing to put the Panera on, I think we're going to try to do that on consent. Well, we're going to try to do the consent.
Okay.
And then we can put Linda Avenue next and then Thrash House, I believe. I don't think there's any problems with that, but I'm pretty sure we can do that.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments?
That's it for me.
All right. So we do have one item under Commission Matters, and this is the community benefit discussion. And so to kind of expedite getting this before the Commission, I asked that it come before us without a staff report so that we could just discuss it and see if we want to direct staff to look into anything in particular or if we want to make a recommendation to Council. Just given the workload of staff, we didn't want to push this off too long, waiting for staff to do some work on this. So, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just want to ask a procedural question. If I understood the town manager when he was brand new here, he gave us a stern lecture about what we could direct and what we could ask, and I understood he made that distinction. So I'm not discouraging us from asking anything what we want, but he seemed to bridle a bit at the concept of the Planning Commission directing staff as opposed to requesting, because it is an allocation of resources, whatever. So I guess I'd like to know, did I misunderstand him, or is in fact that the case? We can request staff some answers, but we cannot direct staff, for example, to do it. I don't know if that's the case.
Well, I wasn't privy to the to the information that he gave to you, but it would be my belief that the council can direct staff to do special assignments the Planning Commission would request, and that would then be prioritized within the council's direction and existing work plan that they've approved. However, that being said, I did want to comment that we are meeting with the council members now on the various, can we close that? It is. We are meeting with the council members on getting ready for the general plan review next Monday, and many council members, there are some community benefit related policies or action items, I think they're policies in the general plan, and a number of council members have raised those, so I think there's going to be a policy level discussion Monday night on community benefit. So I guess my point is I think it's somewhat timely. And I think I did mention to the council members when we were talking to them about this that the Planning Commission has some concerns and want to talk about that also. So I think two things could happen. First off, the council may give us some direction on Monday night. Second, or we may end up having, we've talked about having a Planning Commission council retreat. That community benefit may be that discussion. And I think the council members we've talked with thought that was a good idea. So I think in this case, I think it's okay to have the conversation. I think that it'd be good to get Planning Commission's position on that. I have a little bit more information I wanted to hand out too, and then we can kind of bundle that up and give the council that so we can see where they want to go with that.
Great. Commissioner Jensen.
So follow-up procedure on Commissioner O'Donnell's question, then given what you've said, Ms. Rooney, I wonder if a discussion here is premature, because obviously we can't direct the council to do anything. We can only make the comments that we normally make in the course of reviewing different projects. So I wonder if it's going to be discussed on Monday night, and there's a potential for a retreat, if any comments we make here are just premature.
I think that's really up to the Planning Commission to decide. I don't think the discussion at council on Monday will be that in-depth because we have so much to cover. My sense is the council will talk about and decide whether they want to put it on to a future agenda or whether they want to make it a retreat topic. I think that's probably as far. We won't get a lot of depth with that discussion. We just won't have the time. But I can just say it's on their radar scope too, so if that helps.
And if I could add, I also think given the workload of the next couple meetings, we have the time and it's been agendized. Here's our opportunity to at least maybe come to some consensus or not. I mean, we don't know where we stand as a commission necessarily. I mean, some people have commented on it at meetings, but not everyone has, and we don't know what level of agreement we have on the commission. So I think it might be worthwhile. So Ms. Rooney, did you have
I did.
background?
I know that we transmitted to you the overall community benefit policy, but I just want you to understand kind of the genesis of where that came from. So what I'm handing out to you are two different policies. They're actually two different resolutions that the council adopted. One was the infill policy, and that's where community benefit, community benefit first came up with the traffic policy, yes. And as you know, any development that generates 5 AM, PM peak trips then is obligated to community benefit. So I've got the traffic policy, and the only part, and I've actually indicated where that section is so that you can see that. And then I also have the infill policy where community benefit was used again. And I think some of the confusion, at least coming in from the outside, where I see some confusion, and I see maybe some confusion, not confusion, but maybe it is confusion on the council's part. Sometimes our language says a project needs to show its value or its community benefit, and I'm not sure if that really means its value to the community. In other words, that the project is bringing value to the community, or is it community benefit in the terms of an offering? I was about to say an exaction, but it's an offering. So I even get confused with this. But anyway, here's the two policies, and that kind of the genesis of where then from that became the community benefit policy.
We actually had a work item in the general plan that was adopted in 2000 that said a community benefit policy or a definition of community benefit and a policy should be developed. And so that I think stemmed from these two documents and the mention of community benefit. And perhaps when the policy was actually adopted by council in 2002, it was taken a different direction from what you read in those two documents.
Commissioner Jensen, do you want to add something?
We have these two documents, and I'll just speak for one person as my own recollection of historical development of the community benefit policy. When I first went on the Planning Commission in, I'm afraid to say, 1989, right after the earthquake, there was the policy in the town at that point was if there was a proposal for development and it had an adverse impact on a critical intersection and it degraded the level of service at the intersection, and I can't remember the letters, but it degraded the service at the intersection. That was it. You were done. You were not going to develop. That was the end. So the default was you're not going to develop if you have a traffic impact. Reasonable minds thought, well, perhaps that is a bit harsh. So in order to come up with a solution to or what was thought we should have some more reasonable approach to it, And I noticed that the first traffic thing was in 1991, which makes sense to me because it was being discussed when I first came on. I said, okay, well, what we need to have is a mechanism by which a development, even though it has an impact, could potentially be approved. And the means by which it could potentially be approved was if it could show a value to the community, not an offering, not an exaction, a value to the community that would tip the scales on the balance of better with it, better without it, where the commission and the town council could make a discretionary call that the benefit of the development outweighed the impact of the traffic or the otherwise degradation to a particular neighborhood or area. So it was, in fact, a community value that was determined for this project. It was not what it has become now, basically, give us $10,000 and we'll put lights on a bridge across town. So it's unfortunate that, so that's why you hear me squawking, because the way it has evolved is there no longer, to me, seems to be a reasoned evaluation of a community-wide, and I don't want to use the word benefit, I want to say a determination that there is some overall good to be had from having this developed, as opposed to this is great for the developer that wants to put, a bunch of whatever he's going to put on this corner, and so we'll all suffer with the traffic or the whatever's happening while it gets developed, and we'll feel good because when we walk across the Main Street Bridge, there'll be lights there. And that's not at all how it was developed. So the reason I keep making comments on it is because it was really conceived of as that there was an assessment that there was something that the town could gain from approving this development, and that would be overall. And in particular, it was to the place that was going to be most impacted by this development, the intersection, for example, or the cars that were going through, or the pain you were going to have to suffer while it was there. But everybody would say in the end, gee, I'm glad we have this. So it seems convoluted to me that we now have made this into, and I know that we have a new policy that says certain things, but instead of the default being, if it has a traffic impact, you can't do it, now it's, you can do it, but what are you going to give us for it? And so just in this commissioner's mind, I think there has to be, I would urge the town council to come back to something, or the planning commission to consider something where we come back more toward the middle, and either the developer is doing something that truly is of a value to the community. For example, undergrounding utilities would be a really nice thing, which would be a benefit to the community that we could get an exaction from the developer. Or if you're impacting a neighborhood for a year while you do construction, or you really are shutting down traffic in an area, that you're doing something that has an immediate benefit to that area that you're impacting, as opposed to, and I keep using the example, but the lights across the bridge, which doesn't mean a lot to somebody who's across town. So that's why I'm always ranting about it, and that was the genesis of the policy. So I don't know what other people think, but I'm just hoping that we can move more toward the middle on this policy.
I just wanted to ask clarification. Great history. Thank you. Back in pre-policy, let's say, when the project did have a traffic impact and it degraded an intersection, did they have to show that value even if they mitigated the traffic impacts?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think this was probably post-policy, for example, but the housing track, which is off University, if you're traveling northbound, and it's right before you get to Highway 9 and you go down the hill to the freeway. Where that development comes out onto University was quite controversial because it's right next to the signal and right next to the fire department. And so there was lots of discussion about, well, how can you have cars going in and out there if a fire truck has to get by, or you're blocking the intersection even because they can't turn right, etc. So they actually had to do improvements which escape me now what they did. But in that area at the intersection, for the sole purpose of mitigating the impacts they were going to have on the intersection, whether they had an overall whether they added an overall value to the town of Los Gatos was separate and apart from that, I believe, at the time. But I'm not specifically remembering whether that was post-initial policy or not. But it used to be that you had to fix the problem you were creating, and then you also had to show that it was a good thing you were doing.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I guess I have 3 points. One, the development for infill projects is the portion that talks about strong community benefit is fairly simple, and I think it is consistent with what Commissioner Jensen just said. The approval of the infill project shall demonstrate a strong community benefit. And then when you get to the traffic impact policy, and that's B2, where they talk, B4, I'm sorry, where they talk about community benefit, I read that again to say, demonstrate that the projects benefit the community which outweigh the traffic impact. So at the end of the day, there's still a traffic impact, but the community benefit outweighs that. So that says that. Where I get a little lost is, that being the case, what are we doing? Because we often say the community benefit is going to be down the road and unrelated. And that seems to be our policy, but you can't find it anywhere. So at least I haven't found it anywhere. It isn't clear to me. So as far as comments go, I would like some clarification from the town as to what is our policy when it isn't as expressed in these 2 documents. These documents don't cause a problem for me, although I think they're worth discussing to see if we would agree on them. But the bigger question is, what we've been doing lately is unrelated to both of these documents, and I don't know where it comes from. And so that's what I would ask.
To me, where the confusion comes in is in the more recent 2002 community benefit policy, and it says on item number 3 on page 2, says the community benefit offering does not need to correlate directly with the project or with the project's impacts. The benefit may be off-site or unrelated to the project. To me, that's where it comes in, and that's what causes the problem. Commissioner Erickson?
Yeah, I would just add to that, if you read the purpose, if I would read the purpose of that same policy, and particularly in the first 2 paragraphs, the purpose wouldn't lead me to that particular section of the policy. So it's going to be how the policy plays itself out is not consistent with the purpose as expressed in the first part of the policy, because the purpose of the policy actually creates a nexus between the impact of it seems like to me, between the impacts of the project and the mitigation of those impacts.
And then again, at the end of the policy, under the definition of community benefit, it clearly says it is an offering. I mean, that's the first part of the definition. But then it says that it overrides certain negative impacts resulting from an infill project. So there, to me, it says it has to be related to the impact. So it seems to me that there are some inherent inconsistencies in the policy that are at the root of the confusion, at least for me. So, Commissioner Telesfor, did you want to?
Yeah, I would only agree with you, because in the second paragraph of the purpose, it clearly states a community benefit offering is intended to add to the merits of a project. To the merits of a project there. That's how I interpret that. However, when you're right, number 3, I had circled because I was thinking, well, it says the benefit may be off-site or unrelated to the project. So now I'm thinking, okay, so this is now gray. And I thought the purpose was pretty apparent, and now it's becoming a little. So I don't know if this has to be rewritten. We have to really maybe have another discussion about what are we doing. Not every, I can see merit with some community benefits being off-site. And I can see that, in some cases with traffic or that kind of thing, we need to keep the community benefit with the project. So perhaps we really do need to think about having this rediscussed and rewritten.
Commissioner Erickson actually had his hand up first.
I guess I would potentially direct this question to Mr. Martello. So what are the legal, without us being here for an hour or so, with the explanation and the answer, if there's an easy answer, what are the legal considerations in creating the nexus to the project, and at what point does the town, in its back and forth with an applicant, cross the line with exacting something that might either be unethical or potentially illegal?
The last part's easiest to answer. It's when the applicant yells "ouch," we'll cross the line. But no, actually, defining this more, what I've heard from the commission tonight, and you should know, I think I heard this my first or second meeting, you guys wrestled with a tough one. It was like, pay $15,000 and all the traffic problems go away. Town managers talked about this, has an interest in clarifying it. So the toughest thing from a legal standpoint is to impose a condition and then enforce a condition that you can't find any legal support for. The reason no one gets excited about this one because it's so small. And I really appreciated the history. If I can fill in the blank, what was happening at that time, 1989, 1993, was cities were doing, actually a little bit before that, they were adopting growth control ordinances, and then they came up with this way to do it through a traffic control. In other words, if you go above levels, if your project drives a below level of service C, you can't go in. And right around that time frame, probably 1990 or 1991, a case came down, I think it was called Long Beach Equities versus City of Simi Valley, which said you can't charge the last guy in for all the problems you already created. So you can't say you can't develop your property, we let everybody else. So cities borrow, this looks to me like something that was borrowed loosely from some of the growth control ordinances, which were essentially beauty contests. In other words, everybody had to meet all the standards, you came in, they all had the same problems, but then did you give more to the schools? Oh, did you give something to the library? Oh, are you going to put a median island in? Or are you going to underground utilities? So, but to get back to full circle from a town attorney standpoint, I think from a planning department standpoint, we would certainly, I think, support a little clarity about what you're picking off the list. Now, what most, and this pins down to your question, what's involved in doing this? It's typically identifying things that would be a community benefit. That while it doesn't solve the traffic issue, or maybe it does, maybe it's 3 intersections away it solves the traffic issues, but it might be undergrounding utilities, it might be improving storm drainage, or something like that, where you can't really solve this traffic problem because it requires a freeway off-ramp, but you can fix the storm drains, which are also a problem for pedestrians and people driving down the street. So it's that kind of thing, but coming up with basically a list of items.
Yeah, Commissioner Telesfor.
What you said triggered something with me about the traffic 3 lights away from the project. But in some cases, it could be that cumulative effect. And so it would be, I would think, it would be okay to have, some mitigation measures or community benefit 3 lights away, is my point. Right. I mean, so we need a list.
Well, but generally, you're going to have a traffic study that's going to indicate where the impacts are. We do have the list. In fact, I think the policy even refers to the list. The town adopts a list of, what is the terminology that's used?
Yeah, there's a partial list in the policy.
Yeah, well, there's also a list that the town has adopted. I think the council has endorsed. But it is, in some cases, it is lights on the bridge, and it is, more the aesthetic things and not necessarily infrastructure. So,
Commissioner Jensen and then Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just, I guess, looking for some direction for this discussion, it just seems so obvious that political realities changed from 1991 to 2002. And when we originally thought of this policy, we were not exacting any money for schools or parks or anything else. You actually had to show that the benefits of your project outweighed the detriments to the town. Monetary was not really a consideration at all. But by 2002, with a different council, now the policy talks about offerings. That was never part of the concept. So if the council in its wisdom decides that offerings are what they want, then that's what we need to do. If they want to have a retreat and discuss at least this commissioner's hearkening back to the good old days when we weren't just exacting offerings and essentially allowing whatever development was proposed, then I just think it just needs to be a political discussion. And if they say the development is good, give us an offering, then that's what we have to do. But it just seems like the policies are different because it's different politics.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I would first say that I don't agree with the view that the presumption has shifted from disapproval to approval, which I believe is part of that comment. I believe, and I know I think Commissioner Jensen perhaps would be happy if this were the case, but doesn't believe it to be the case. I believe that this Planning Commission does not approve a project because simply of a community benefit. For example, I don't know what good $15,000 worth of lights on the bridge does for the project. It does zero good. So I would like to think, and I can tell you that this commissioner would not approve a project because of $15,000 worth of lights unless the project, in my view, were worth approving.
And I don't think that, by the way.
Okay, fine, good. Let me just finish this. Because it does raise very interesting questions, because then you say, okay, if you would have approved it anyway, then what is the community benefit? Well, maybe you were saying, but gosh, isn't it nice to get a community benefit? And maybe that's adequate. And maybe, as counsel says, nobody's bothered to sue over it because who wants to sue over $15,000? But that's a heck of a way to run a railroad. So if that's what it is, I guess we don't want to say it. I wouldn't say that. But I just will say this. I have the respect for my fellow commissioners that I don't believe that you would approve a project because there's Christmas lights. And therefore, you have to decide to approve the project first. And then when you say, you know, this is a project that ought to have an additional community benefit, then we can talk about Christmas lights or fire hydrants or whatever you want to talk about. So that's the way I personally interpret this. I'm not saying it's right. And I would like to think that many of us do the same thing. But it would be nice to know more precisely what it is the council wants us to do. And I don't believe the council wants us to say, bad project, but Christmas lights makes the difference. I just don't believe that.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. I would like to think, and I'm pretty sure everyone here approves or disapproves of a project on its merits, and then the community benefit adequacy is kind of a separate issue above and beyond whether or not we're going to approve a project. So I hope we're all in agreement on that. So, but it does sound like we're looking for some clarity from council. So, Commissioner Erickson, you want to chime in here real quick?
I guess I would just add one other thing. It seemed to me, in the best of all worlds, that no project would be approved which didn't benefit the community. That inherent in the nature of both the ordinances that the town passes, the state laws that are applicable, and the general plan and all the specific plans and other kinds of policies that are adopted, the purpose, the underlying purpose of those policies and those ordinances is to look after the community and maintain the integrity of the community and its values and those kind of things. So you would never approve, I would argue that you would never approve a project that didn't benefit the community. So it seems like to me the real question is when you have impacts from a project that you're approving and you can't fully mitigate against the impact of those, what do you do then? And it seems like to me you would mitigate against those impacts to the greatest extent that you could, And then you would make a decision, am I willing to live with the unmitigated, the impacts that I can't fully unmitigate, if you would, and is the benefit of the project greater? So it would have never led me to adopt a community benefit policy, because I would have tried to mitigate in the adoption of the development of the project against the impact of the project. And to the extent that I couldn't do that, I need to make a judgment, do I want to approve the project or not, and live with the unmitigated thing. So it would have never led me to a policy in any logic that I could figure out.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I think I get very confused because we have the California Environmental Quality Act, which does weigh and has certain effects which cannot be mitigated, and then there are overriding considerations. But we're not talking about that, I don't believe here. So it is possible, because of zoning, that a particular project, you will not find a community benefit. I don't know what that would be. But, for example, a single-family home, that your druthers, you wouldn't want to put it there. But the person may have a right to have it there, and you may say, fine, you got a right to, you got it. Now, what the community benefit of that is, I don't know. You can always say the observance of law is a community benefit. But I think where we get very confused is what does the town think their policy is? I think, personally, I'm satisfied we kind of work it out, but it certainly is not with any mathematical precision. I think the five of us here probably don't always agree on how we get there, but we often get there together, which is fine, I guess. It's just that it makes you very uncomfortable not quite knowing how the town views this. So we could really use some help, because if it simply says, would you approve this project or not, and if you would, is it the kind of project where you ought to require an additional community benefit or a community benefit, then that's fine. I mean, I can deal with that. But if it's something else, that the community benefit outweighs the detriment of the project, then I get very confused, because I kind of thought that was CEQA's thing. And there you have a total different response. You've got to say, are there overriding considerations which, notwithstanding the non-mitigable adverse impacts, we're going to approve it? That's a big step. So that's where my confusion is.
Okay, so getting back to where I was just a second ago, I think it's clear we'd like clarification. And do you have enough to take our concerns to the council, or however, what should that look like?
I think we have plenty to, I think there's confusion on all parts. I don't think it's limited to this body. I think it's includes staff. It includes the council. So I do believe, as I mentioned when we started this conversation, that the council, I think, has concerns too. So I think we have enough discussion here, ambiguity in the policy. How do you apply it? What are the measures? How do you judge things? That I really strongly believe the council probably feels similar, and my sense is we'll end up either putting it onto a study session, or they will direct us to do some staff work to bring it back to the Planning Commission and ultimately to the council. Timeline, I can't give you a timeline. My sense is we'll probably end up having a retreat as soon as the general plan is adopted and we have a little breathing room.
And I assume the general consensus is we'd like to see that as a topic for the retreat. So, okay. So I don't think we need to have any further discussion. Anyone else have any closing thoughts? All right. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.